Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tyrone McDonald, and I'm the Government and Community Relations Manager for Neighborhood Housing Services of Brooklyn. And we are happy to bring you our webinar today, Housing Discrimination, what it looks like, and what can you do about it. We decided to do this topic because housing discrimination, unfortunately, is a pervasive social issue. Being a housing organization, we see it, and also we also receive complaints about it all the time. So we want to have a workshop to see what it looks like, because there's different forms of discrimination, also different groups which are protected by the federal, state, and also city. And also, what is the recourse that you have? A lot of times, people who are victims of housing discrimination or other forms of discrimination, take it lying down. You know, um, they get denied access, and they just fall into apathy and not do anything about it. So this workshop is basically here to empower you, to make you identify it, but also give you some tools and also resources so you can fight this thing. Okay. All right. And we'll be joined by our main speaker. I only got one speaker for today, Elizabeth Grossman, who is executive director of the Fair Housing Justice Center. And she'll go a little bit more in depth about the organization, but they provide discrimination testing as well as actually bring suits of discrimination on the state and city level. All right. We'll also be joined by my colleague, the Director of Operations, Ms. Angela Cummings, who's going to be handling the Q&A. Okay. So before we, all right, I'll move further along. Here are a couple of housekeeping items. All right. All right. Now there'll be a Q&A box. All right. Feel free to post your questions there for fear of forgetting them, because I know many of you here probably may have a lot of questions. And we don't want your questions to vanish from your head. So if any burning questions come to mind, immediately jot it down in the Q&A. Okay. All right. Questions will be tried to be answered throughout the webinar. If not, there are going to be certain questions we're going to hold to the end for our speaker to answer. Okay. Also, unanswered questions will be addressed at the end as time allows. All right. For any questions that we cannot get to due to the high volume, feel free to reach out to either NHS or the speaker. Their email is listed on this slide, and we'll be more than welcome to answer your question via email. Okay. Or you can also contact us as well. All right. For those who are listening on your phone on an audio exclusively, only through sound, please note that you can use *6 to mute and unmute, and also *9 to raise and lower your hand. Okay. Also, we also would strongly urge that people refrain from asking any personal questions that will reveal some personal and confidential information about yourself. Okay. We're here to protect you and protect your privacy. So try to keep questions as general as possible. And also, if a question is very sensitive and very personal, we ask that you probably contact us offline and we can address it, because not everything we want to address in an open forum, for the public to see and hear. Okay. All right. So moving right along, now who we are. Some of you on the line may be familiar with Neighborhood Housing Services. Some of you may not be. But we are a HUD-approved not-for-profit housing organization. We started in 1982, which is a little over 40 years ago. And our mission is to create and preserve affordable housing and revitalize underserved areas. And we do this through education, like the workshops you see here, through financial assistance, that's loans and grants, also through community leadership. All right. The people who actually serve or actually serve on the board of NHS are basically people like yourself. people who have businesses in the community, people actually work in the community, live in the community, okay? And a lot of our focus is on housing preservation. So that's first-time home buying, counseling, and education. Housing preservation, which includes education on how to repair your house, also financial resources such as loans and grants to do repairs, all right, and upkeep, energy efficiency, as well as educational resources such as workshops such as these, home buyer education, landlord training, home maintenance training, and so forth, which I'll go into depth later on. We do partner with the government and also businesses and also other not-for-profits like the one you see here, Fair Housing Justice Center. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if many people on the line, what your status are. So you may have a mixed group. You may have some tenants. You may have home buyers. We just want to say that when it comes to housing discrimination, the title may suggest that only tenants, but that's not the case. Housing discrimination impacts tenants and first-time home buyers. In neighborhood housing services, we do provide services in those areas. When it comes to tenant counseling, we assist people who may have questions regarding their lease. They want to know what their rights are. Let's say that in the middle of an eviction and they're going through an anxiety attack and they want to know what to do and where to go, what should I turn to? We can try to settle your nerves and try to give you some direction. We also assist people applying for various financial assistance for renters, such as a rent freeze. If you live in a rent stabilized apartment, and that's based on whether you're a senior or disabled. All right. We also assist with Housing Connect as well. All right, which is a lottery system administered by the city, which we get a lot of questions on. In terms of how to apply. A lot of people say they don't hear anything back, which is kind of common because a lot of people do apply for it, but they also have some questions regarding glitches with the system. Sometimes they may forget their password. They have issues uploading documents in which a developer asks for. So we assist with all of those items. Renters insurance, now, education. Now, we don't sell insurance, but we do see renters insurance is an aspect of financial education, also financial well-being. As you know, there's been a sheer number of fires in New York City, particularly Brooklyn, throughout this year. And many of those people, I can probably guarantee you, because most tenants in New York do not have renters insurance, did not have renters insurance. So basically, a lot of them either ended up in shelters or and they end up in like thousands of dollars of lost items, clothing, furniture, appliances. And renters insurance, basically helps you recoup that. All right. Not just fires, but also burglaries. And also renters insurance includes loss of use, in the event that you can't use your apartment because of the fire or an evacuation, the insurance company would pay for either a hotel or another temporary apartment. So all of that we talk about. We don't want people, to be victimized by circumstance. So we do, talk about renters insurance, but also just to let you know what you're getting, what some of the coverage is, so you have an understanding. Home buyer education, which is one of our popular programs for all those who are actually thinking about buying a home, a co-op, a condo. We're there to help you from start to finish, explain some things to you, such as what points are, the various mortgage products, what closing costs consist of, the difference between having an appraisal and having a home inspection, the difference between a buyer's real estate agent and a seller's real estate agent. All of those things we get into. What does your mortgage consist of? Homeowners insurance and so forth. We discuss that. We give monthly workshops on that, so you can get like an overview. But we also give an in-depth workshop, 10 hours, for all those who are thinking about seriously buying. And for many of you, you probably would need that if you want to go on to get either certain type of mortgages like Sony Ma, some other mortgages, and also if you and want to entertain getting a down payment assistance. Landlord training, that's part and parcel of homebuyer education, but landlord training is also open to existing landlords, which teaches you how to be a better landlord. Screening tenants. We go over things such as what we're going to go over today as far as fair housing and knowing the law as far as discrimination. Maintain your property. What are some good practices, as far as maintaining your property? Some city rules and some city codes that you're going to need to know and be responsible for, okay? And the thing is that the education does not stop, when you're a tenant or once you own a home. It actually just continue to another level. Because owning a home, you're going to have to deal with things like taxes. You're going to have to deal with homeowners insurance and flood insurance, energy efficiency. And we do provide workshops on that. You're also going to have to contend with home repair financing if you want to do repairs and upkeep, because many of you, who are out there who actually have a property, you basically want to upkeep it. So upkeep is value, but also, maintain the neighborhood value as well. Mortgage counseling, some of you I know interest rates are high right now, but at some point you may want to consider doing a refinance. We do free counseling just to see what the pros and cons are in refinancing. Okay. Reverse mortgage. We are a HUD certified reverse mortgage for you out there who may have a senior who may be thinking about that. I mentioned landlord training before, affordable property management, neighborhood housing services. We do provide property management for small landlords that are individuals who own 2 to 4 family. And if it's a 1-family unit, that it will be an investment unit. And we want to target this population because you have many people out there who basically probably feel a little bit over their head as far as property management. That includes collecting money from the tenant, paying bills, paying taxes, scheduling maintenance and so forth. We'll handle all of that. Okay. All right. And for everyone, we have workshops such as getting a little bit ahead of myself. We have things such as estate planning, which is open up to everyone, and you're not too rich or too poor to get estate planning. And estate planning, the subject is wide and deep, okay? Estate planning just to include will, it also includes healthcare proxy, living will, and things such as that. So it's not just about securing your assets, but also in the event of an end of life, we'll happen to you if you get into a coma. How would your affairs be taken care of? Who do you want to assign to take care of your affairs in the event that, God forbid, that were to happen. Okay. All right. Also, what type of funeral arrangements you would want, and if your relatives will live up to your wishes. All of that we talk in estate plan, in addition to securing your assets. All right. Because we can't, in our line of work in neighborhood housing services, a lot of these issues overlap. Estate planning overlaps with home buying, which overlaps with foreclosure and so forth. And we can't tell you how many times, an individual passes away, and many of the heirs and the family left behind, are in a quandary because this person did not have a will. And so things, get caught up in probate court and so forth. And a lot of people don't know what to do. Financial education, all right. We give that every month. My colleague, Ms. Cummings, give that every month, where we go over what some of your financial goals. It's never too late, or never too early, just to plan your financial goals, to adhere to that, and also improve your credit. Whether your goal is improving your credit, saving more, investing more, and so forth. All right, disaster and emergency preparedness. We do have workshops regularly on that, and that includes a number of things. That includes a number of things such as getting a go bag, just preparing, your having a plan, sharing it with your family and so forth, and also home maintenance training. And home maintenance training is one of our popular programs. Do-it-yourself programs. We're currently in the second level, currently right now. 7-week program, we teach you how to do things yourself. So you'll learn how to hold a hammer correctly, various tools that you probably would need to get started. You learn how to repair, let's say, damaged sheetrock, painting, and so forth. All right. So we are a full cycle organization covering tenant services, first-time home buying, also housing preservation. And our offices in East Flatbush and also Canarsie. Now, hopefully, we're going to have office in Coney Island. Okay. All right. So without much further ado, I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to bring on our featured speaker. And also, before we go on, I also want to give a shout out to two of my colleagues who also online, Clarence and also Kia, who are here. Thank you for joining us, guys. And also, I believe Ms. Cummings is on there as well. Thank you for joining us. Without much further ado, I want to bring on our featured speaker, Elizabeth Grossman, from the Fair Housing Justice Center, who's going to discuss housing discrimination, what it looks like, what can you do, and also a little bit about what her organization does and how her organization can be beneficial to you. Okay, so Ms. Grossman, all right, the floor is yours, and I'm going to start the share so I can actually bring up your slides. Okay, start. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Great to hear about the excellent work that NDS is doing, and looking forward to working with you going forward. I'm here to talk about housing discrimination. I can really talk about anything that anyone wants me to talk about that involves the rights of tenants who are experiencing discrimination. So I have a number of slides. I'm going to go through them. I welcome questions at any time. As Tyrone said, feel free to put them in the chat, and interested in hearing about people's experiences without too many details, but happy to answer any questions that anyone has. As I'll share with you, I have colleagues who conduct intakes every day, and so I'll show you how to bring housing discrimination to our attention if you have an issue that you want to discuss in detail. So if we can go on to the first slide. The Fair Housing Justice Center is an 18-year-old organization. Our primary mission is to eliminate housing discrimination. To do that, we also promote policies and programs that foster open, accessible, and inclusive communities. And everything we do is in furtherance of strengthening enforcement of fair housing laws. So that's our mission. If you go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about what we do. So our service area is New York City and the 7 surrounding counties. That gives us roughly 65% of New York State's population, which is over 3% of the people who live in the United States. So we have a big mission and a big service area, and we're a small but mighty organization, but we're here to help. And I'll tell you a little bit more how we can try to do that. Next slide, please. Don't give away the answers here. So who do fair housing laws protect? Anyone know the answer to this besides what you saw? Let's go on to the answer, which is fair housing laws protect everyone, because everyone has the protected characteristics that are listed here. There are federal laws, state laws, and city laws that prohibit housing discrimination. The protected characteristics are listed here. I have a sheet that we can include in the chat that kind of lays this all out, so no one needs to take notes or anything like that. All of this information is available on our website. All of the characteristics that are protected by federal law on the left side are also protected by state law and city law. But if you have a matter that involves one of the less common issues, we have a really helpful chart that will help you figure out where you are protected and what you can call us to talk about how to take steps to enforce your right. But these are the general protected discriminations. When we say fair housing, we mean that our mission is to prevent discrimination. So we are more narrow than unfair treatment, which a lot of tenants experience, but we are focused on preventing and eliminating and remedying discrimination based on the characteristics listed on this chart. Often, as you may know, people are discriminated against on the basis of more than one protected characteristic, and our model follows the trail to look at intersectional discrimination as well, which may involve more than one protected characteristic. I have a little note there that in a couple weeks, height and weight will become protected characteristics under the city law. So this list is always evolving. Our policy work is always trying to get more protected characteristics covered. The biggest issue we're working on now is that we believe that interaction with the criminal legal system should become a protected characteristic, and we're actively involved in that issue on both the state and city level. So stay tuned on that. If you believe you are discriminated against based on interaction with the criminal legal system, definitely do give us a call, because there's advice we can give you based on that. So I think we can move on to the next slide now. I see the question in the chat. I'm going to address that. So after I do that, please tell me if I haven't addressed it or you have additional questions. So what conduct is prohibited by fair housing laws? Again, we have a fact sheet that we can send around in the chat, and or you can locate it on our website. They're in English and Spanish, all of our fact sheets. They're about to be available in Chinese and Russian, and we're sort of adding new ones at any time. So there's a lot of information on there that's very helpful. But common examples of prohibited conduct is refusing to rent or sell after the potential tenant or potential homeowner makes a bona fide offer, refusing to negotiate for the rental or purchase of housing or otherwise make housing unavailable, advertising or making a statement that indicates a preference, limitation, or discrimination. We used to see a lot more of these. We still see a little bit of it now. And I think the next item is really what we see the most. We see landlords and brokers and home sellers falsely state that housing is available to show rent or purchase to some people, while continuing to state that housing is available to show rent or purchase to other people. And I'll talk more about that later. A lot of steering still goes on, particularly on the basis of race and national origin, where applicants are steered to or away from certain areas within a building or complex, or different buildings or neighborhoods, which maintains the historical segregation that our communities are experiencing. Next slide, please. So as I think is pretty obvious, discrimination is still pervasive. As I said before, it's gone from being super blatant, where people are being told they're being discriminated against and people are placing discriminatory ads, to being much more subtle and hidden, and therefore it's much harder for us to root it out. But I'll tell you about our methods in a little bit. As you all know, living in our city is extremely expensive, and that makes housing options very limited. And once an apartment is put on the market, it tends to go very, very, very quickly, which makes it hard to track the nature of discrimination. As I referred to before, we have a very, very segregated city. We're often the first or second most segregated city in every survey that you've seen, and there are areas of concentrated poverty that are perpetuated when segregation is perpetuated by discrimination and steering. And then there's limited enforcement of fair housing laws by government agencies. So the federal government, the state government, and the city government have the responsibility to enforce fair housing laws, and those programs have never been fully funded, and you see very limited enforcement by the government agencies. I'm going to get to the question about the minimum income requirements, so thank you for that good question. Remind me if I don't get to it in a little bit, but I think we will get there. Okay, moving forward, next slide, please. So overview of our programs. As I said before, we have an intake team. They will provide counseling. They can coordinate with our investigative team to provide testing, which I'll talk about in a minute. And occasionally we have the ability to provide legal referrals to people seeking to file their own housing discrimination complaints. We have an accessibility fund for people with disabilities who are seeking to make their housing accessible. If you qualify based on your income, we will fund an architectural assessment of your home, and you can then use that information to advocate to your landlord or other housing provider that they are responsible for funding the cost of that reasonable modification to your home. If the landlord is not legally responsible for paying, the fund can pay for that cost of the modification. So there's more information on our website about that, and you can contact our intake team if you need a reasonable modification to your home because of a disability. We engage in proactive investigations to document and eliminate systemic housing discrimination. We use testers, which I'll talk about in a minute, but this is the core of our work and what allows us to be the most successful. We engage in fair housing advocacy on policy issues, like adding new protected characteristics that I mentioned earlier, as well as many other issues. We have some policy priorities on our website if you're interested in that. We engage in a wide range of education and outreach activities like this one. We enjoy interacting with the public and answering your questions and providing assistance. And then we provide technical assistance and training to other organizations who work with people who are experiencing discrimination. Next slide, please. So our accomplishments over 18 years are, as a result of our lawsuits, we have opened more than 80,000 housing units where there was discrimination to ensure that there is no longer discrimination. We've done this through bringing over 155 lawsuits, which not only open the housing units, but change the practices of housing providers. So we bring lawsuits in our own name as an organizational plaintiff to stop discrimination, and then we ensure that the settlement has mechanisms in place that prevent future discrimination, and we work with the landlord or other housing provider. We monitor them for a period of time to make sure that they are following the commitments in the settlement or after we win at trial. So we've been able to recover more than $54 million in damages and penalties for people who have experienced housing discrimination. And in doing so, we've changed the business practices of hundreds of housing providers and government agencies. So we appreciate information that is brought to us by the public because it allows us to do this work. We take anonymous complaints through our website that we'll never know who brought them. So sometimes people see discrimination and they want to report it, but they don't want to be involved, and our website is the perfect way for anyone to do that. Next slide, please. So what makes us so effective? As I said earlier, we use testers through our Acting for Justice program. We have 200 professional actors that are trained by our staff people to pose as home seekers and inquire about the availability of housing. So we usually match two testers. They have a different protected, they are different in the way of one protected characteristic, and they inquire about housing. So we may have a black tester who inquires about housing and is told that the apartment is unavailable. We then have a white tester with very similar, a very similar profile, inquire about that housing, and then they are often told that the housing is still available. So we do this a number of times and establish a systemic pattern of disparate treatment, and that serves as the basis for our complainants to file complaints, or the organization to file complaints, which we sometimes do in conjunction with the complainants. So we engage in a broad range of investigations that includes landlords, real estate companies, condos, co-ops, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, banks or lenders, housing authorities, state or local governments, and as I mentioned earlier, we will look at any advertising or media that is conducted by housing providers. So it's a very broad range of housing providers. It's really anyone who's providing housing for a significant duration of time. Okay, next slide, please. So we do testing when we receive a complaint of discrimination. We can't do testing in every case, but when we're contacted with a report of possible discrimination, we can provide corroborative evidence. So if we get someone who calls us and said, I have a voucher and I've been ghosted by a landlord or a broker after I disclose my voucher, we can have a tester posing as a person with a voucher contact them, and then a tester posing as a person with employment contact them, and see if the allegations are corroborated by the testing. And then that person is able to use the information to pursue their claims if they choose to. Systemic testing, as I mentioned before, it uncovers the subtle discrimination undetectable to ordinary home seekers. Most of our testers report that housing providers are very polite to them and very civil to them, and they have no idea they're being discriminated against until they are compared systemically to the treatment of other testers. So as I said before, this can protect people who are reluctant to report discrimination. We don't want to have home seekers have the burden of complaining about discrimination. We want to take that off of you and do our own investigations whenever possible, which is why we can take your complaint and understand that you don't wish to pursue your rights at this time, or as I said earlier, we can take an anonymous complaint. So looking at the first question, discriminators usually act under the radar to protect themselves. What are the best ways to prove that you're experiencing abuse and discriminations that can help one's case with legal evidence? So as I said before, in certain situations, the FHJC can connect you or can connect you to services. We can counsel you as to how to preserve evidence. We can give you technical assistance in how to approach landlords. We have some information on our website for tenants with vouchers with our advice. But what I can say here generically is, you're advised to document communications. If you can have email or text communications, that would establish a clear record. Keep track of who you're talking to, when you talk to them, what they said, and just try to document everything that's happening to us. But you're absolutely right. I agree with your question, and we're just trying to encourage people to document it to the extent that they're comfortable doing it. So that more advice on that is available, but that's my general answer. I think we can move on to the next slide. One more. Nope, keep going. And I think you're going backwards. There we go. Forward again. Keep going. Okay, our intake process. So this is a repeat of the past slide, the protected characteristics that we've covered. I've talked about our intake process. You can call, you can put in a complaint through the website. Sometimes we get some mail, you can write us a letter, whatever works for you to be able to communicate your concerns. You can report discrimination that is not against you. We'll really take any information that is helpful in rooting out discrimination. So next slide. Common forms of discrimination. Here's just a few more examples: refusing to rent or sell, being told that a property is no longer available, being ignored by a real estate agent or landlord. Again, sometimes people call us and they aren't sure if they're being discriminated against, and we're not either. And the only way to actually figure that out is for testing. Sometimes we test and we realize that the agent or landlord is ignoring everyone and they're just not responding at all. So we get helpful information either way, regardless of the results of our testing. We see a lot of disparate treatment. People with certain protected characteristics receive different amenities for different prices. There are different rules, and there's harassment of people of certain protected characteristics. Reasonable modifications and accommodations are entitled. People with disabilities are entitled to reasonable accommodations, which are exceptions to a policy. So if, let's say, a building had a no pets rule and a tenant had an emotional support animal that they needed because of their disability, it would be a reasonable accommodation request to ask the housing to allow their emotional support animal. So that's a common one. There's plenty of other examples. Reasonable modifications I mentioned, but there's lots of ways in which housing is inaccessible to people with disabilities, and people have a right to make a modification request, and we can help with that. It is a violation of the law to ignore a request for reasonable accommodation and modification, but we can help you figure out the best way to communicate with your landlord about that. I think the question about the new apartment buildings is maybe better for Tyrone. So that would be a good one for you to take when you're ready. But I can keep going on the next slide. So lawful source of income. So right now, this is our biggest category of complaints that we receive from people who use housing vouchers and subsidies and believe they're being discriminated against based on their voucher. We get complaints every day. If you look at our website, you can see a number of lawsuits that we've brought against landlords and brokers. The law covers lawful source of income, so it could be public assistance, it could be income from self-employment, but the overwhelming majority of complaints that we get are housing vouchers and subsidies. So the instances of discrimination, a lot of refusing to accept housing subsidies, the credit score and minimum income requirements if subsidy covers 100% of the rent. So this is a question that we got earlier. A lot of landlords have a policy that's not discriminatory on its face, that they want the applicants that they're not qualified unless their income equals 40, or in some cases, something like 43 times the rent. So we just won a case in federal court at the end of September that ruled that if the voucher covers your full rent, that the landlord cannot impose a minimum income requirement. So if you're seeing these kinds of things, we would love to hear about them. We're hoping that the victory we got in our lawsuit, which was against Goldfarb Properties, which is one of the larger landlords in New York, it has already spread to other landlords. We're hoping other landlords change their policies, but we know not all of them have. So we're very interested in hearing about negative experiences with people, especially those who have 100% fully paid voucher, because when you have a voucher that's paid 100% of your rent, the government has already vetted you and determined that that's what you can pay, and the government is paying your rent for you. So there should be absolutely no reason why the landlord is imposing a minimum income requirement or a credit score. We were successful on the issue of vouchers that don't cover 100% of the rent, but that remains tied up in the courts. And so I don't have a complete answer for you as of now as to where that's going to end up, but we got a favorable ruling so far on that. So very interested in hearing people's experiences on that. And then, as I said before, the biggest thing that we get complained about by voucher holders is just being ignored and ghosted. And again, testing is really the only way for us to determine whether this is a pattern against vouching holders or, you know, the housing provider is just not returning phone calls for other reasons. Okay, don't think, oh, here's a good question. So do renters need to answer questions regarding marital status, children, and their ages, or other questions regarding any of the protected class status? So great question, a little complicated to answer. So I think you need to look at the individual situations. You know, it would be a reasonable question to ask who would be living in the apartment and how many people and what their ages are. But if you're being treated differently because you have a family, and the thing we see a lot on family status discrimination is steering families to the first floor of the apartment on the theory that may be true, but that children are allowed and that no one wants to live below a family. That is family status discrimination. Asking, you know, people if they're pregnant, asking people if they plan to expand their family, all of that is family status discrimination. So I think the question's really appreciated. You're right to be thinking about, you know, am I potentially being discriminated against because of my family status? But we'd have to take a look at the individual questions before really weighing in on that. I think if you see an ad that says married people only or something like that, that's going to be significant evidence of discrimination. Sometimes you see like perfect for empty nesters, right? That's a signal that there might be family discrimination status going on. So thank you for that question. I don't think we have more questions, so we can go on to the next slide. I think we did this one. We did this one. Okay, this is good. So how we can help in the intake process. As I said before, we can corroborate your story through fair housing testing. We can help you gather additional evidence. Wait, no, we were good on that. So collecting documentation, we can advise people on what documents they need. We can help you figure out how to get that best evidence and the record of what's going on. We'll occasionally help someone record a phone call or an interaction with someone so they preserve the evidence. And we can either give you advice on getting witness statements or do that ourselves. So a big way that we're helpful with reasonable accommodation requests is helping you send a letter with a doctor's note. We can give you advice on communications with your doctor about that note. And we can help you send the letter to make sure that you're requesting a reasonable accommodation in the way that is most likely to be granted. Next slide, please. So I mentioned our accessibility fund. Its purpose is to support people with disabilities who make reasonable modification requests. The eligibility is that you have a disability, your household income is at or below 165% of the New York State median family income, and you are not the owner of your home. So we are happy to receive applications. If you need a reasonable accommodation to fill out the application, we're happy to help you with that. But people are encouraged if they meet these eligibility criteria and they need a modification to apply. We talk to so many people who do not understand that it is their right to modify their apartment, and that if you live in New York City, it is probably the landlord's responsibility to pay. So let us know if you have any issues on that. Next slide, please. So if we, when we get an intake call for the Adele Friedman Fund, we will complete the application. If approved, as I said earlier, we will have an architect come to the home, speak to the person, look at the situation, and then make recommendations as to what the modifications should be. If the modifications are considered reasonable, which they usually are, then you can request modifications of your landlord. If the landlord is unwilling to do it and we believe they're legally entitled to do it, we may make an attorney referral to have someone represent you going forward in a court case to enforce your rights. And we have provided financial assistance, mostly outside of New York City, if the housing provider is not legally obligated to pay, but we look at every case. So recently, we provided a ramp for someone who was unable to leave her home. She was 98 years old. She hadn't left her home in quite some time, and she was then able to do so because we installed a ramp. And I'm happy to report the first thing she did when she was able to leave her home was to go get her latest round of the COVID vaccine. So we were happy to see that happen for her. But that's an example where we can really help someone quickly and efficiently and be able to get the medical care that they need. So next slide, please. So what possible remedies are available if you're discriminated against? As I said earlier, we will try to refer certain complaints to our cooperating attorneys when they are available. If you're discriminated against, you have a right to seek monetary compensation, as well as non-monetary relief to compensate for damages to victims and change the practices of housing providers. So we're often trying to get them to enact policies. We're trying to get them to be transparent on their websites that they don't discriminate. We're training their staff, we're monitoring their records, and we're looking for any way that we can to make sure that they're not continuing to discriminate. If you bring a court case seeking a reasonable accommodation or modification, you would then receive that reasonable modification or accommodation if you won. And we can help you if you're interested in filing an administrative complaint or a lawsuit. Next slide, please. I'm looking at the comment. My landlord constantly discriminated against me, calling me a foreigner because I'm from Haiti and now threatening me with eviction. I should also add I do not owe any rent. I always pay monthly. She refuses to renew my lease. Is that something you can get help with? Yes, please call us. Here's our information. It sounds like you are being subject to harassment and possibly discrimination because of your national origin. This is exactly what we're here to do. If you look at our website, we changed the color. It used to be red. We decided it should be blue and green, but it's in the same place and it says report housing discrimination. So please call us. That's exactly the kind of issue that we can help you with. And we want to help you before you are in housing court, if at all possible, before you get served with eviction papers. We want to help you assert your rights before you're in housing court. If you are in housing court and you do have a fair housing issue, we will absolutely help you and work with your attorneys if you have an attorney in housing court, but please do contact us before that happens if you can. So thank you for that question. I'm sorry that's happening to you, and we would absolutely like to help you, so please keep in touch. Okay, next slide, please. So here's more information. We have lots of information, as I said, on our website. We're on social media. I think we're not on Twitter anymore, so I forgot to edit that out of the PowerPoint, but you can contact us and follow us in many ways. We have a newsletter that we send out, not every day, but with important events, like new lawsuits that we're filing or trainings that we're conducting. So you can sign up on that through the contact us portion of our website. So I think we are close to done. Is there one more slide? Nope, questions and answers. So great questions so far, really appreciate them and happy to take more.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So let's go to the Q&A. All right. There are quite a few questions here. That question was done. All right.
I think the only one I didn't answer, Tyrone, is the second one. I thought maybe you had a comment on that.
Okay. The second one, is it legal to well,
no, what about new apartment buildings?
All right, let me go to new apartment buildings. All right, there are a lot of new apartment buildings being built in the Jewish area. How come those apartments aren't being offered to people who in need or on Housing Connect? How come it's only being built for Jewish people? Now, from the question, I'm assuming they're probably referring to the Orthodox Jewish community, I'm assuming. All right. Do you have a response to that? Because I remember there were a couple of years ago, there was a case, I believe it was in Williamsburg, where some apartments were being built and it was an issue of, I think, height. And the community was fighting over that. The community wanted to be higher, but some members of the Orthodox community want to be lower, for religious reasons. So I don't know if you can address that, Ms. Grossman.
Yeah, I didn't know if this was referring to a particular issue. So if there is a landlord of a particular religion or any other protected characteristic who puts it out there that they only want people of that religion to be in their building, that is discrimination. If they say that you can't apply to live in our building unless you already know someone who lives in the building, that is likely discrimination as well. So I don't know of a building that is officially only built for the Jewish community. But I know there have been circumstances where buildings are being built and that's the unofficial marketing that has perpetuated segregation and discrimination. And so if you see a situation like that, that's definitely something that we want to hear about.
All right, but to add to that question, because I think it's a good question, let's say, for example, because like the various religious organizations may have housing for its members, like let's say for the priesthood or for this religious member, and that is considered okay, right?
That's an exception to the fair housing laws. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the exception, but it has to be, it has to be offered to, I guess, members in their own congregation, I guess. Well, what are some of the stipulations on that, that makes that, legal?
So it's just an exception to the law. So again, it's very hard to answer the questions in a vacuum, but if a religious organization has housing for its own employees, that's probably not going to be a violation of the fair housing law. If they have a home for the priest, that's probably not going to be a violation of fair housing laws. But if there is a building that is marketing apartments to the public and there is a informal or formal restriction or segregation, that's going to be discrimination, and that's something that we want to hear about.
All right,
if you saw an advertisement that said, near a church or near a synagogue, right, that would be a sign that they are looking to include only people from a certain faith, and that would likely, it would certainly be a sign that discrimination may be happening.
Well, thank you. I think there was some more. You answered the Haiti. All right, now here's a good question. Can NYCHA discriminate against anyone's sexuality or approach you in that matter. So can NYCHA, I guess we're dealing with New York City Housing Authority, can they discriminate against someone's sexuality? And could you address that question?
So gender identity and sexual orientation are protected characteristics under federal, state, and city law. You cannot be discriminated against because of your sexuality. Please let us know if you are. There should be no justification for any comments about your gender identity or sexual orientation.
Okay, thank you. Because I know a lot of the comments they refer to private landlords. This is actually the first question actually referring to NYCHA was like a public entity. So thank you for that.
My second question, do you want to ask?
Oh yeah. Also, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment alone. My landlord refused to let me have a roommate. Is that legal for me to do so? Because I need extra money to help with the rent. Now this is yeah. So I guess this deals with some type of fairness and equity, not necessarily protected classes, but definitely in line of what we're discussing. So yeah, please address that one. Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. Probably you definitely have a right to live with someone of your choice.
Yes, you do.
I would look at your lease. I doubt your lease says that no one can live in the apartment with you. So it could be a discriminatory situation where they have a prejudice against your partner that you want to move in with you, or they don't want you to, have your teenager move in with you, or something that's related to a protected characteristic. But this is really not a question we get that often. And I think just a blatant refusal to let you have a roommate because they only want one person living there is probably not discrimination, but it is probably violative of the law and your lease. So you'd have to take a look at your lease. I don't know, Tyrone, do you have a different answer to that?
Yeah, definitely. In an apartment, a person does have a right, actually, to have someone live with them. Just provided they do inform the landlord within 30 days. All right. But they do have that right, to do so. But you do have to let your landlord know. All right. Yeah. So I find it very strange that a person adamantly refused, for you to have a roommate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very strange.
Very strange. But yeah, but you do have, you could probably give us or FHJC, a call offline so you explore, some remedies to that. All right, this is more of like a landlord tenant issue than discrimination, but still, let's address it. Does asking a security deposit in addition to drastically increasing the rent during a lease renewal normal, or is it also housing discrimination, especially if a household has never missed a payment and has been living in a rental for more than 1 to 4 years? So is asking for a security deposit in addition to drastically increasing the rent, is that normally a release renewal? Is it also housing discrimination? All right. Now the thing is that if your rent does go up, your landlord does have the right, if you do have a deposit, to ask for the difference. So let's say your rent goes up like $80, and the landlord does have a right to ask you for an extra $80, for your deposit. So that is that is lawful. I don't know if you want to add to that, Elizabeth.
So yeah, this doesn't appear to be a fair housing issue on its face, but one thing I would say to you if you called us is, what is happening to your neighbors? And do you see any pattern that would be relevant to a protected characteristic? So if all the people of color have had drastically increasing rent, and all the white people do not, that's housing discrimination. So usually we see this situation where this is happening off the board. It's a market rate apartment. They're allowed to raise the rent and they're trying to get as much money as they can for apartments. But sometimes there is a fair housing issue. And so I would talk to my neighbors and see if there's any pattern that you can establish that might relate to a protected characteristic. And if there is, give us a call.
Thank you. You know what, Elizabeth, I do have some questions that may it may be on some of the audience attendees in the audience mind. Also, some things that I've encountered with working in neighborhood housing services in Brooklyn. Number one, let's say with co-ops. One thing that we've reports that we've gotten is individuals who first-time home buyers are looking to purchase in a co-op, and in the end, the co-op declined them, and which left that first-time homebuyer feeling there was probably some discrimination at play, whether it's racial, whether age discrimination, gender, and so forth. Now, how is it that a lot of co-ops are not allowed to disclose the reason why they decline someone? Could you go into that? Because that may be on someone's mind out there. We do get that question often,
Yeah.
for people to buy co-ops.
Great question. So they are allowed to disclose the reason that they
Okay.
decline an application, but they are not required to disclose the reason. So they usually don't want to disclose the reason.
Okay.
So one of our policy priorities is exactly this. And so we have as our policy order priority a co-op disclosure law that has been talked about in the city council, and I can get anyone more information offline. But so our hope is that the city passes a law that will require co-ops to give reasons to people who have made an application and not been accepted, because we believe that discrimination is being hidden and it's more difficult to prove because people are not being given a reason.
Okay, great.
So if anyone's interested in that, please let me know.
Okay. Also, also another question that they often get now regarding accessibility within an apartment, particularly within the common areas. Is it the landlord's right, or is the landlord obligated to let's say, for example, they have a tenant who's disabled, have a wheelchair, and I'm not a wheelchair, and they have steps in the apartment. Is it mandated, or does that landlord have an obligation to have a ramp, so that tenant can actually get into the entrance, without any type of issue? Is it mandated?
So for housing constructed post 1991, accessibility is mandated, and there's very complicated rules that govern that. So the first question we're going to ask you is it a building designed and constructed post 1991? If it is, those common areas need to be accessible. That doesn't mean that someone else might not be entitled to a reasonable modification, because what's accessible for one person is not necessarily accessible for another person. If it's an older building, people with disabilities still have a right to reasonable modifications and still have a right to reasonable accommodations. There might be some modifications that are not reasonable. So if we're in a 2-family home and we're asking, a landlord that only owns that home to put in an elevator, right? That's probably not going to be a reasonable accommodation if you look at the cost of that. And so sometimes people they don't have a disability or they don't need a modification. They're in an apartment, they then develop a disability and they develop the need for the modification. Sometimes that apartment cannot be made accessible in a reasonable manner, but what the reasonable accommodation request is to transfer to a different apartment. So if there's an apartment with stairs that the person can no longer navigate, and it's a large landlord with plenty of available buildings, then the reasonable accommodation request is to transfer to a ground floor apartment, rather than making a reasonable modification request to get a ramp instead of the stairs. So it really depends on the situation. That's why we have an architect go into the home and look at the common areas to see what is needed for this person with their disability and their needs in this space.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. So another question from John Mitchell. What about New York Connect or Housing Connect disclosing the status? I don't know what status you're referring to, whether it's immigration status or whatever the case may be, or medical status. Let's go with the medical status since you stated that the staff or tenants. Now, I'm not certain about them disclosing it to tenants, but as far as staff, they probably have to do that, given the staff, particularly who work in Housing Connect or, are dealing with their case, so they have to know that information. But is it because they do act on the application for Housing Connect, when you do your initial intake form, if you're disabled or have a disability, is that a form of discrimination, or is that frowned upon, Elizabeth? Because they do ask for that in the initial, intake form, at least your profile. When you set up your profile on Housing Connect, you do ask you about your disability, if you have a disability.
Right. I think they're asking to see if you need a certain apartment or you need accommodations or modifications. So
Absolutely.
disclosing to staff or tenants, hopefully just to staff, as you said, but Elizabeth uses a wheelchair. She's going to need to have this ground floor apartment is different than saying Elizabeth has cancer, right? If it's an invisible disability that isn't relevant to their ability to live in that home, they should not be disclosing it. But when people are applying for housing, saying I need a modification or I need an accommodation, it should be disclosed to people on a need to know basis, which is almost never going to be other tenants.
Absolutely. Okay. And I'm surprised this question was not posed in the Q&A, but the question of pets, right? Because I know buildings, so some buildings have like a no pet policy. Now, just go over to the public. Now, under what conditions are pets allowed, given a no pet policy? And also, when does it become discrimination? Or a double standard or inequity when dealing with pets in that situation? Because there's been situations where some people I've heard reports of some people who are punished for having a pet and other people are not. So when it becomes discrimination in that respect, a two-parter.
Right. So it is discrimination to deny a person with a disability who needs an emotional support animal or a service animal to live in that housing. It is not discrimination to have a no pets policy. A service animal or an emotional support animal is not a pet. So we get this a lot. Sometimes people are allowed to have small pets, but they don't want the large pets. That's not usually discrimination, but that's inconsistent application of the no pets policy. So from our angle, it's almost always a disability issue where someone has an entitlement to that service animal or emotional support animal, and the landlord tries to enforce their no pets policy, and the animal should then be considered, having that animal should be considered a reasonable accommodation to the no pets policy. And so that's something people can contact us. But if you don't have a disability and you're not allowed a pet, but your neighbor's allowed a pet because they lived in the building before there was a no pets policy, that's not likely to be discrimination.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So sometimes the building has a pets are okay policy, then for whatever reason they put a no pets policy in, but they let the existing pets live there till the end of their time, but they don't allow any new pets.
Oh, so you get like
so that's probably
in.
not discrimination, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
But
okay.
again, if someone calls us and says, I'm an immigrant, I'm being harassed because I'm an immigrant, they won't let me have my dog, but my neighbor has a dog, and it has nothing to do with disability, that could likely be discrimination as well, because they're different treatment based on a different protected characteristic.
Okay. All right. Somebody, because I may have missed it. Do you need to have had direct interaction with landlord entity to report potential discrimination to FHJC? Do you need to have like a
Great question. So we will take any report from anyone. Sometimes we don't act on it right away. Sometimes we save it, but we get another one later, and that gives us the impetus. So like I said, we take anonymous complaints through our website. If you see a neighbor who's subject to harassment or something like that, and you feel compelled to report it, you're free to do so. If you see an ad that you have no intention of applying for an apartment, you're free to do so. So you're really able to report any information to us that concerns you enough to think about it as a fair housing issue, and we're happy to receive that and in furtherance of our mission. So we are getting more and more anonymous complaints about brokers that are sometimes their coworkers who understand the law and their agreement to abide by the law, but they see a colleague not complying with the law and engaging in discrimination, and they don't want their name attached, but they want us to know about it. And so we get anonymous complaints, sometimes that you can kind of guess might be from a coworker. So any information that you have, feel free to report it either anonymously or otherwise, and we appreciate it, whether we can work with it right away or later on.
Okay. All right. All right. Probably 2 or 3 more questions. The time now is 7:15. All right. Anonymous attendee. All right. Acquaintances, 3 generations to purchase a property, 3 building on it as a family compound, but the person showing the property would not let the prospective buyers see 3 homes on it, on the lot, so that they can determine if they want to buy, the property. They will walk around outside though. Is it unfair practice? All right. It is probably shady, definitely. It was subsequently sold to a developer who demolished the 3 buildings and now constructing a 3-story condo. It seemed to me that the realtors were holding the property for developers, yet making it appear that they were selling to anyone who came along. So given that story, all right, and if that story is valid and true, is that a form of discrimination? Or does it fall in one of the protected classes? Or you need some more?
Probably not, based on what I'm seeing. Again, you know, we have long conversations with people so we can understand the nuances of what happened and give us the best ability to give you advice and a response. But trying to get the most money from a developer for your buildings doesn't violate fair housing laws.
Okay. All right. Are those laws applied to private home as well as, because I rent in a private home? Absolutely. But I'll let you further expound on that. But absolutely, the private home is not exempt.
Yeah,
But,
there's a couple exemptions that are on our fact sheets that I'll be happy to send you for very small private homes, and they're different under the state and city law, but generally they would not be exempt. But for very small buildings, and some of it's connected to whether it's owned or occupied, so I'd have to refer you to our fact sheet for the exact details on that.
Okay. Well, one question that I have, Elizabeth, is that on the as far as the federal protected classes, I know they list like race, religion, national origin, and color. For a lot of people, color and race may be synonymous. What's the distinction there as far as being a protected class, as far as race and color?
So yes, a lot of people, it is synonymous. Color is used sometimes when the person making the complaint doesn't know for sure that the landlord knew what their race was.
Okay.
So sometimes mixed race people who present as a person of color or a person with dark skin get treated a certain way, but sometimes they are subject to harassment that is actually not based on their race and their national origin,
Right.
but because they have dark skin.
Gotcha.
So that the legal claim in that circumstance would be color, because we don't know for sure that the landlord knew their race. Sometimes there's a situation where Black people with lighter skin are treated differently than Black people with darker skin, and so they have the same race, but color is relevant to the claim. But as you imply, we get many more race claims than color, but it does apply to some fact scenarios like the ones I listed.
Okay. All right, so I think that's about it is regarding.
Can we do the last question, which is a great
Sure.
question that I forgot to
Absolutely.
mention? So thank you so much for that.
All right. All right.
The
Besides,
question is, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
all right. Besides HJC, any suggestions on where people can find more information on tenant rights and unfair treatments? It's so tricky to determine out, figure out what's lawful and not.
Well, I think
You
you
can start right
provide
now.
tenants,
I'll give my
yeah,
two
you
cents.
provide tenants' rights counseling, right? So I
Right,
think,
yes, we do.
you know, between the two of us, we should be able to help you sort that out.
Sure. And also, if you're listening, also if you call 311 HPD, they also have like a HPD and also the Attorney General, which is statewide. They also have like a pamphlet on, regarding tenant rights. So you can also, if you want something handy, with a PDF or you want a hard copy, you can call 311 and they'll actually send you a pamphlet on tenant rights, which also includes some of the fair housing stuff too. Okay.
There's just the one question before that that I wanted to
Sure.
address on what happens if you have a discriminatory complaint, but you are afraid to report because you think there is going to be some retaliation. That's exactly why the FHJC exists. So we're not a government agency who's going to receive a complaint for you and notify your landlord. We're here to have a confidential, private conversation with you about what their rights are. And so that's exactly what we want to be for you, is a place to someone to talk to and inform you about your rights and explain the law to you so that you can decide if you want to go forward or not. And retaliation is against the law. Retaliation for complaining about any of the discrimination we've been discussing is against the law. And it's very clear that there is retaliation going on. So hopefully you'll feel comfortable contacting us, and we can give you that information that helps you decide next steps. So thank you very much for that question.
Okay, great. And that concludes our Q&A. All right, for any questions that we didn't answer, I'm gonna stop the share. I'm gonna pull up the closing slides. So you can definitely reach out to Elizabeth, or you can just go back here. You could definitely reach out to Elizabeth or Neighborhood Housing Services if you have any additional questions. All right, and also for all those who actually attended this workshop, you will receive an email. You can also use that email to pose your question if you didn't answer. All right, let's leave this up for a few seconds before I continue. Okay. All right, so moving right along. All right, so. All right, just additional resources and upcoming events. All right, thank you for attending this workshop, but we do have some upcoming events. We have a renter's insurance workshop, what it covers and what it costs, on Thursday, November the 9th. We have a first-time homebuyer orientation on Tuesday, November the 14th. Flood insurance, if there's any homeowners on the call, on November the 13th. I said we don't sell, especially when it comes to insurance, we don't sell insurance, but we just go over what it covers, the need for it, and particularly with flood insurance, as we can see with some heavy rains and some of the rising waters, even areas which are not flood areas have been flooded, due to overflowing drains and stuff like that. So we just talk about different issues like that, filing a claim, and so forth, and the need for individuals to get flood insurance, particularly as the flood maps are changing. All right, and also some other workshops, understanding your deed, estate planning, that's coming up as well, financial coaching on December 6th, and also affordable property management. Okay, we have the Black Ownership Project, Generation to Generation on estate planning. All right, where we cover it, no cost wills, powers of attorney, living trust, healthcare proxies. You can call Angela Davidson. Even though this program is actually targeting African American communities, open up to anyone. who actually, wants to set up a will, or take advantage of creating a power of attorney or a living will or healthcare proxy. Okay, you can contact us for more information on that. All right, for any veterans out there, all right, we talked a lot about reasonable accommodations, but if any veterans out there, whether you're a homeowner or tenant, who are disabled and you need assistance regarding making your home or residence accessible to you, we do have the Home Healthy Heroes grant where we offer up to $20,000. All right, to do these repairs. It can include grab bars, widening doors, chair lifts, a walking shower, and so forth. Feel free to call Ms. Cummings at 718-469-4679 at 718-469-4679. Now, if you are eligible if you're a tenant, but just keep in mind, if you're a tenant who are in need of accessibility repairs, your landlord would be the one to apply. So just keep a note of that. Okay. All right. Be prepared for emergencies and disasters. Have a plan, a meeting place, a go bag. All right. You probably want to get alerts on your phone from Notify NYC. That's probably a good idea for you. And also, we'll be giving some upcoming workshops on disaster preparedness, covering different things, whether it's fire safety, getting a go bag, and so forth. Free weatherization program. All right. This is open up to tenants as well as homeowners. All right. So if you're interested in free weatherization, all right, feel free to give us a call on that. You can call Ms. Angela Cummings at 718-469-4679. There are income eligibility requirements, and we will inform you of that. All right. NHS is part of the Community Support Network. All right. And that's a partnership with the Department of Health, where we actually avail community resources, whether it's medical resources, resources on mental and emotional health, in addition to other services like SNAP benefits and other services to the community, and also share this with businesses and houses of worship in the following zip codes: 11203, 11212, 11226, and 11233. So if anyone here is like, lives in one of those zip codes or has a business in one of those zip codes and probably interested in being a part of our survey, or if you're a business owner and you want to actually post some information where residents can come in and scan and get taken to like a site with various resources addressing either physical health, emotional support, homes, food, clothes, and so forth, feel free to give us a call on that. You can go to www.nhsbrooklyn.org/CSN. Okay, like Fair Housing Justice Center. All right, you can say hi to us on social media. All right, on Facebook, it's NHS Brooklyn. Instagram is at NHS Brooklyn. And also Twitter, I should say formerly Twitter, which is now X. All right, you can go to at NHS Brooklyn as well. Okay. All right, that brings us to a close. I just want to thank you, all of us, for joining us. We hope this workshop was enriching. We hope that you got a lot out of it. For any questions I said that we could not answer, feel free to reach out to Neighborhood Housing Services or Elizabeth from FHJC. We will definitely answer that via email. All right. And just want to thank you. You will receive after the end of this workshop email as a snapshot survey. All right. Please complete that. And because these surveys actually helps us improve, actually gives us ideas of what future workshops you may be interested in, and also things we probably need to improve. So feel free and fill that out because your opinion matters to us. Okay, I'm gonna stop the share. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank the NHS staff for actually answering some of the questions and actually being here. And I just want to wish you a wonderful day. And if you have not voted, and it's still time, you have up until 9 o'clock, feel free to get out there and cast your vote. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you again, Elizabeth. Sure.